Oh my gosh, I think that they know so much about him. I was thinking about that. And one of the things that Elvis did, first of all, when he was young, he never liked to go to people's homes or eat because he didn't like eating with other people's silverware.
Elvis Presley never fully recovered from his breakup with Priscilla because she represented emotional stability in his chaotic life, and losing her reignited his deep-seated fears of abandonment, dating back to his mother's death. The breakup exacerbated his substance abuse, leading to a physical and emotional decline. Ultimately, Priscilla's departure marked the beginning of a downward spiral that Elvis could never escape. Elvis Presley, often referred to as the King of Rock and Roll, became one of the most iconic figures in music history. His electrifying performances, distinct voice, and cultural impact made him a legend during his lifetime. Yet behind the public persona was a man deeply affected by personal struggles, one of the most significant being his romantic relationship with Priscilla Presley. Their love story, which began when Priscilla was just a teenager and Elvis a global superstar, was filled with both glamour and challenges. The end of their relationship in the early 1970s marked a turning point in Elvis's life. While their divorce was legally finalized in 1973, the emotional impact on Elvis persisted long after. This breakup wasn't just a separation from a partner, it represented a profound personal loss that Elvis never fully recovered from. The weight of the breakup intertwined with his already complex relationship with fame, substance abuse, and personal insecurities, ultimately influencing the trajectory of his later life and career. Throughout their relationship, Elvis viewed Priscilla not only as a romantic partner, but as a stabilizing force in his life, a role that became impossible for her to sustain as his fame grew and personal struggles deepened. The bond they shared was central to Elvis's personal world, and when it was broken, the emotional consequences rippled through the rest of his life. The significance of the breakup goes beyond just the end of a marriage. It speaks to larger themes of emotional dependency, the isolating nature of fame, and the difficulty of maintaining a personal life in the spotlight. This essay will delve into why Elvis Presley never fully recovered from his breakup with Priscilla, exploring the psychological, emotional, and career-related impacts. We will examine the key moments in their relationship, from its inception to its eventual collapse, and how these events shaped the man behind the music. By understanding the emotional depth of this breakup, we gain insight into Elvis's struggles in his final years, his tragic decline, and the lasting impact Priscilla had on his life and legacy. Early life and emotional foundations of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley's early life in Tupelo, Mississippi, laid the emotional foundations that would influence his relationships and personal struggles throughout his life. Born on January 8, 1935, into a working-class family, Elvis experienced poverty firsthand. His relationship with his parents, particularly his mother, Gladys Presley, shaped his emotional development in profound ways. Gladys and Elvis shared a bond that was unusually intense. Elvis often referred to her as his number one girl, and she was fiercely protective of him. This close relationship created an emotional dependency that would affect Elvis's relationships with other women later in life. Gladys was Elvis's emotional anchor, providing him with a sense of stability and security, especially during the early years of his fame. When she died in 1958, Elvis was devastated. The grief was so profound that it left a lasting emotional scar, deepening his insecurities and sense of loss. Her death created a void that Elvis would spend the rest of his life trying to fill. Elvis's early experiences with fame only amplified these emotional challenges. By the time he was a teenager, Elvis was already on the path to becoming a global superstar. However, with fame came isolation. As his career skyrocketed, Elvis found it increasingly difficult to form genuine relationships. The adoration of millions couldn't substitute for real emotional connection, and Elvis began to rely heavily on a small group of close confidants, which included his entourage known as the Memphis Mafia. However, these relationships, while loyal, often reinforced Elvis's emotional dependency and isolation from the outside world. Priscilla entered Elvis's life at a time when he was already grappling with these emotional issues. Meeting her when she was just 14 and he was stationed in Germany during his military service, Elvis was immediately drawn to her youth and innocence. Priscilla, in many ways, represented the idealized woman Elvis sought after, someone who could fill the void left by his mother's death and provide him with emotional stability. However, this dynamic also placed immense pressure on Priscilla to conform to the role Elvis envisioned for her, which would eventually contribute to the unraveling of their relationship. The emotional foundations of Elvis's life, his dependency on strong maternal figures, his struggle with insecurity, and the isolating effects of fame set the stage for his later struggles in relationships. His deep emotional need for connection and stability, combined with the pressures of celebrity life, made it difficult for him to maintain healthy, balanced partnerships. The early bond with his mother and the emotional trauma of her loss would linger throughout his life, influencing his relationships, especially with Priscilla. The beginning of Elvis and Priscilla's relationship. Elvis Presley's relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu began under unique and somewhat controversial circumstances. When they met in 1959, Elvis was 24 and stationed in Germany as part of his military service. Priscilla, just 14 at the time, was the daughter of a U.S. Air Force officer also stationed in Germany. Despite the age gap, Elvis was immediately captivated by Priscilla's beauty, innocence, and apparent naivety, qualities that he found comforting and attractive. During their courtship, which lasted several years before they eventually married, Priscilla remained largely under the influence of Elvis. She moved to Graceland, Elvis's Memphis estate, at the age of 17, where her life was carefully controlled by Elvis and his entourage. She was isolated from the outside world, with her role primarily being to please Elvis and fit the image he had of her. This control extended to nearly every aspect of her life, from how she dressed to how she conducted herself in public and private. Elvis's need for control stemmed from his own emotional insecurities. Priscilla became a stabilizing figure in his life, someone who could offer him emotional comfort and fulfill his need for companionship. However, the imbalance of power in their relationship meant that Priscilla's needs and desires often took a backseat to Elvis's. Over time, this would lead to increasing tension between them, as Priscilla began to feel trapped by the role Elvis had assigned to her. Despite these challenges, their relationship endured through the 1960s, with the couple eventually marrying in 1967. The public was fascinated by the union of the king of rock and roll and his young bride, and their marriage became a media spectacle. However, the cracks in their relationship were already beginning to show, even in the early years of their marriage. Elvis's demanding career, combined with his growing drug use and erratic behavior, placed immense strain on their partnership. Priscilla, still in her 20s, began to seek independence and fulfillment outside of her role as Elvis's wife. The marriage and its struggles. Elvis and Priscilla's marriage began as a highly publicized and glamorous event, but beneath the surface, their relationship was already facing significant challenges. They were married on May 1st, 1967, in a private ceremony in Las Vegas. While the world saw a picture-perfect couple, their relationship was strained by the demands of fame, emotional distance, and personal differences. One of the early struggles in their marriage was Elvis's demanding career. As one of the most famous entertainers in the world, his schedule was grueling, often taking him away from home for extended periods. This left Priscilla feeling isolated and alone at Graceland. The pressure of being married to such a public figure only exacerbated these feelings. Despite her young age, Priscilla was expected to conform to the role of the perfect wife, always presentable and supportive of Elvis, even as her personal needs were neglected. Elvis's increasing reliance on prescription drugs to cope with the pressures of fame further strained their relationship. His drug use, initially meant to manage his demanding performance schedule, soon spiraled out of control. He became erratic, moody, and unpredictable, which made it difficult for Priscilla to maintain a stable and healthy relationship with him. As his drug use worsened, Elvis became more emotionally distant, and Priscilla found herself increasingly alone in the marriage. The couple's sexual relationship also became a point of contention. After the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, in 1968, Elvis's interest in maintaining a romantic relationship with Priscilla began to wane. According to Priscilla, Elvis had a complicated view of women, often idealizing them in ways that made it difficult for him to maintain a physical relationship once they became mothers. This, coupled with his increasing emotional distance and infidelity, led to growing dissatisfaction on Priscilla's part. The struggles within Elvis and Priscilla's marriage were multifaceted, involving emotional dependency, career pressures, substance abuse, and personal growth. While the public saw a glamorous couple, their relationship was riddled with problems that neither could fully resolve, leading to their eventual separation and divorce. Elvis's emotional dependence on Priscilla. Elvis Presley's emotional dependence on Priscilla was one of the defining features of their relationship, shaping how he viewed her and how he responded to the eventual breakdown of their marriage. From the moment they met, Elvis placed an enormous amount of emotional weight on Priscilla, seeing her not just as a romantic partner, but as a stabilizing force in his chaotic life. This dependence would deepen over the years, ultimately making it difficult for him to recover emotionally after their breakup. At the core of Elvis's emotional dependence was his deep-seated need for comfort and security, stemming from his early life and his close bond with his mother, Gladys. After her death in 1958, Elvis was left with an emotional void that he struggled to fill. When Priscilla entered his life, she quickly became a surrogate figure for this emotional need. Elvis saw her as someone who could provide the love and understanding that he had lost with his mother's death. This placed a significant burden on Priscilla, as she was expected to fulfill not only the role of a wife, but also that of a caregiver and emotional support system. Elvis's need for control over Priscilla was also a manifestation of his emotional dependence. He exerted significant influence over her life, shaping her into the idealized partner he wanted her to be. This control was not just about maintaining dominance in the relationship. It was a way for Elvis to ensure that she remained close to him, emotionally and physically. His fears of abandonment, rooted in his childhood experiences and the loss of his mother, fueled this need for control. By keeping Priscilla dependent on him, Elvis hoped to prevent her from leaving and to maintain a sense of stability in his life. However, this emotional dependence created an unhealthy dynamic in their relationship. Priscilla, still a young woman when they met, was forced to conform to Elvis's expectations while sacrificing her own personal growth and independence. Over time, this imbalance became a source of tension, as Priscilla began to seek her own identity outside of Elvis's influence. Elvis, unable to cope with this shift, became increasingly anxious and insecure, leading to further emotional strain in their marriage. When Priscilla finally left Elvis in 1972, it shattered the emotional foundation he had built around her. His dependence on her was so deep that he struggled to cope with the reality of their separation. Elvis's response to the breakup was marked by a profound sense of loss, and he turned to drugs and erratic behavior as a way to numb the pain. Priscilla's departure represented more than just the end of their marriage. It was the loss of the emotional stability that Elvis had clung to for years. Elvis's emotional dependence on Priscilla was a key factor in his inability to fully recover from their breakup. The emotional void left by her departure, combined with his pre-existing insecurities and unresolved grief from his past, made it nearly impossible for him to move on. The breakup, immediate impact on Elvis. The immediate aftermath of Elvis and Priscilla's breakup in 1972 was a period of emotional turmoil and deep personal crisis for Elvis. For years, their relationship had been the emotional anchor in his life, despite its many difficulties. When Priscilla left, it marked the beginning of a downward spiral for Elvis, both emotionally and physically, from which he would never fully recover. Elvis's initial reaction to Priscilla's decision to leave was one of shock and disbelief. He had always been the dominant figure in their relationship, controlling many aspects of Priscilla's life and assuming that she would remain with him despite the challenges they faced. The reality that Priscilla was seeking her own independence and had found solace in another relationship with Mike Stone was devastating to Elvis's self-image and ego. He saw her departure as a personal betrayal, not just of their marriage, but of the emotional role she played in his life. In the months following the breakup, Elvis's behavior became increasingly erratic. His reliance on prescription drugs, which had already been a problem, escalated significantly as he used them to cope with the pain of losing Priscilla. His mood swings became more extreme, and his performances began to suffer as a result. He was often described by those close to him as being in a state of deep depression, alternating between anger and profound sadness. The public image of Elvis, always confident and in control, was at odds with the private reality of a man who was emotionally unraveling. The emotional impact of losing Priscilla went beyond the immediate pain of separation. For Elvis, Priscilla represented a sense of stability and continuity in his otherwise tumultuous life. Her departure signified the loss of the one person who truly knew him, both as a superstar and as a vulnerable man. Without her, Elvis was left to confront his insecurities and fears on his own, something he had always struggled to do. His coping mechanisms, drugs, seclusion, and reliance on his entourage only deepened his emotional isolation. In the years following the breakup, Elvis would continue to struggle with the emotional fallout. While he remained a public figure and continued to perform, the cracks in his personal life were increasingly visible. The breakup with Priscilla was a turning point in his life, one that marked the beginning of his decline both personally and professionally. Psychological and emotional consequences of the breakup. The psychological and emotional consequences of Elvis Presley's breakup with Priscilla were profound, triggering a deep emotional crisis from which he never fully recovered. Elvis's emotional foundation had always been fragile, and the end of his relationship with Priscilla exacerbated his pre-existing insecurities and emotional struggles. The breakup not only left him devastated in the immediate aftermath, but also set in motion a series of destructive behaviors that would ultimately contribute to his decline in health and well-being. One of the most significant psychological consequences of the breakup was Elvis's intensified sense of abandonment. The deep emotional bond he had with his mother, Gladys, had left him with a lifelong fear of being left behind by those he loved. When Priscilla left him, these unresolved feelings of abandonment resurfaced with a vengeance. He experienced an overwhelming sense of loss, not just of a romantic partner, but of the emotional anchor Priscilla had provided in his life. This fear of abandonment fueled his deepening emotional dependence on drugs, which he used to numb the emotional pain he was experiencing. The breakup also led to a deepening of Elvis's existing insecurities regarding his personal identity. Throughout his career, Elvis had struggled with balancing his public image as a superstar with his private desire for intimacy and emotional connection. The end of his marriage made it even more difficult for him to reconcile these two aspects of his life. He had always relied on Priscilla to provide him with a sense of normalcy and emotional grounding, and without her, he became increasingly disconnected from his personal identity. His relationships with other women after the breakup were largely superficial, and he struggled to form meaningful connections, further deepening his sense of isolation. Moreover, the breakup exacerbated Elvis's struggles with substance abuse. Already relying on prescription drugs to cope with the pressures of fame, he began to use them more heavily after the divorce. Drugs became a way for him to escape the emotional pain of losing Priscilla, but they also compounded his mental health issues. His drug use led to erratic behavior, mood swings, and a deterioration in his physical and emotional health. The people closest to him, including his entourage, enabled his destructive behavior, further isolating him from the outside world. The psychological and emotional consequences of the breakup with Priscilla were long-lasting and far-reaching. Elvis's unresolved emotional wounds, combined with his reliance on drugs, created a cycle of self-destruction from which he could not escape. The end of their relationship marked the beginning of Elvis's personal and professional decline, as he struggled to cope with the emotional aftermath of losing the woman who had been central to his life for so long. Decline. After the breakup. The breakup with Priscilla in 1972 not only affected Elvis Presley emotionally and psychologically, but it also had a significant impact on his career. While Elvis remained one of the most famous entertainers in the world after the split, his professional life began to decline in noticeable ways, driven in part by his deepening emotional struggles and growing substance abuse issues. Elvis's performances became more erratic following the breakup. Before the split, he had been known for his electrifying stage presence and energetic performances, captivating audiences with his charisma and talent. However, in the years following the breakup, fans and critics alike began to notice a change in his performances. His health had deteriorated due to drug use, and he often appeared lethargic and unwell on stage. There were instances where he struggled to get through entire shows, with some performances being canceled due to his inability to perform. While his loyal fan base continued to support him, the overall quality of his work began to decline, diminishing his once legendary stage presence. Elvis's reliance on Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, also increased after the breakup. Parker, whose managerial style was often criticized for prioritizing commercial success over Elvis's artistic growth, kept Elvis working relentlessly despite his declining health. Under Parker's management, Elvis performed an exhausting number of shows, particularly in Las Vegas, where he was contracted to perform multiple engagements. This grueling schedule left little room for Elvis to focus on his personal recovery after the breakup. Instead, the constant work only exacerbated his physical and emotional decline. Moreover, the commercial pressures of staying relevant in the 1970s music scene, which was evolving with the rise of new genres like disco and punk, made it difficult for Elvis to maintain his status as a groundbreaking artist. His music became less in tune with the cultural changes happening around him, and he struggled to evolve creatively. This stagnation in his career was directly tied to the emotional toll of his personal life, as the breakup with Priscilla left him without the motivation or inspiration to push the boundaries of his art. In summary, the breakup with Priscilla had a profound and detrimental impact on Elvis's career. His emotional struggles, compounded by substance abuse and a grueling work schedule, led to a noticeable decline in the quality of his performances and musical output. While he continued to remain a beloved figure, the spark that had defined Elvis's earlier career began to fade as he found it increasingly difficult to cope with both his personal and professional challenges. Cultural and societal expectations of love and marriage. Elvis Presley's relationship and eventual breakup with Priscilla were not just personal matters, but were also deeply intertwined with the cultural and societal expectations of love and marriage during the mid-20th century. In many ways, the pressures of conforming to societal ideals of what a successful marriage should look like played a significant role in both the formation and the unraveling of their relationship. In the 1960s and early 1970s, marriage was often seen as an essential component of a stable and successful life, especially for public figures like Elvis. Fans and the media expected their idols to live up to a certain ideal of domestic bliss. The image of Elvis, the king of rock and roll, married to Priscilla, a beautiful and seemingly perfect young woman, fit neatly into this narrative. Their marriage symbolized the traditional ideal of love and family, which was expected of celebrities at the time. The public was fascinated by the idea that even someone as larger-than-life as Elvis could have a normal domestic life. However, the reality of Elvis and Priscilla's relationship did not match this idealized version. Behind closed doors, the pressures of fame, the demands of Elvis's career, and the imbalance in their relationship were already putting a strain on their marriage. Society's expectations of what a marriage should be made it difficult for both Elvis and Priscilla to address the real issues in their relationship. The ideal of the perfect marriage often prevented them from acknowledging the deeper emotional and psychological struggles they were facing. For Priscilla, societal expectations were particularly suffocating. As Elvis's wife, she was expected to conform to the role of the supportive, subservient spouse. Her personal growth, desires, and ambitions were often overshadowed by the need to maintain her public image as Mrs. Presley. The pressure to fit into this role contributed to her eventual decision to leave Elvis, as she sought to find her own identity outside of the confines of their marriage. The societal expectation that a woman's identity should be defined by her husband was a significant factor in the tension that developed between them. On a broader cultural level, Elvis and Priscilla's breakup reflected changing attitudes toward marriage and gender roles in the 1970s. The women's liberation movement was gaining momentum, and traditional views of marriage were being challenged. Priscilla's decision to leave Elvis and pursue her own life was emblematic of the growing desire among women to break free from the confines of traditional domestic roles. While their breakup was deeply personal, it also resonated with the broader cultural shifts happening in society at the time. Societal expectations of love and marriage played a significant role in both the formation and dissolution of Elvis and Priscilla's relationship. The pressures to conform to an idealized version of marriage, combined with the shifting cultural landscape of the 1970s, made it difficult for them to maintain a healthy and balanced relationship. Their breakup was not just a personal tragedy, but also a reflection of the changing dynamics of love, marriage, and gender roles in society. The role of substance abuse in coping with the breakup. Substance abuse played a crucial role in how Elvis Presley attempted to cope with the emotional fallout from his breakup with Priscilla. While his use of prescription drugs had already been an issue before their separation, the breakup significantly exacerbated his dependency. Drugs became a way for Elvis to escape the intense emotional pain and disappointment he felt in the wake of losing his wife. Unfortunately, this method of coping only accelerated his physical and mental decline, contributing to his inability to heal from the breakup. Elvis's drug use had its roots in the early days of his fame, when the demands of performing and constant public scrutiny began to weigh on him. He started using prescription medications such as amphetamines to stay energized and sleeping pills to counteract insomnia during the 1960s. However, after the breakup, his reliance on these substances increased dramatically. The emotional void left by Priscilla's departure left him feeling more isolated than ever, and drugs became a way to numb the emotional pain he was experiencing. Elvis often turned to sedatives, painkillers, and other substances to quiet the psychological distress that plagued him. The effects of the breakup and subsequent drug use were readily apparent to those around him. Elvis's erratic behavior, mood swings, and increasingly unprofessional conduct were all signs of his deteriorating mental and physical state. His performances suffered as he would sometimes appear on stage visibly under the influence, struggling to maintain the energy and charisma that had made him a star. His personal relationships, too, became strained as those close to him. His entourage, known as the Memphis Mafia, enabled his drug use rather than confronting the problem. They shielded Elvis from the harsh realities of his addiction, further deepening his isolation and emotional turmoil. Elvis also suffered from physical ailments exacerbated by his drug use. His health declined steadily in the years following the breakup, with increasing reports of weight gain, fatigue, and other symptoms related to his substance abuse. These physical issues, in turn, compounded his emotional struggles, creating a vicious cycle from which he could not break free. Despite efforts by a few concerned friends and family members to intervene, Elvis's dependency on drugs continued to grow. Ultimately, the role of substance abuse in Elvis's post-breakup life cannot be overstated. It was both a symptom of his emotional distress and a factor that further hindered his ability to recover from the pain of losing Priscilla. Instead of addressing the root causes of his emotional turmoil, Elvis chose to self-medicate, which only served to deepen his sense of despair and isolation. The breakup marked the beginning of a downward spiral that would culminate in his tragic death in 1977, a consequence of years of untreated emotional wounds and unchecked substance abuse.